everybody, this is Ali. Welcome back to my channel Color Mama 360. It's time for another video. So good morning, good night, good middle of the night, depending on when you're watching. Let's jump into it because today I am continuing on with my If I Only Had One series. So back in December, I was inspired by Jess over at Coloring Bumblebee to make a video about if I only had one book per illustrator. And so I went through my collection, found which illustrators I had 3 books or more from, and I made that video. You can check that out if you want. I will link it in the iCards. And then I decided to make it into a series. And last week I did if I only had one book per category. And I went through, I believe, 9 different categories with you guys and let you know which books I categorized into those categories, and if I could only keep one, which one I would pick. And this week I'm continuing on with probably the hardest one yet, and that's if I only had one medium matchup. So if I only had one book for alcohol markers, if I only had one book for Prismacolors. I've included, let's see, 7 of the probably most used supplies that I own. Now, I don't use all of these supplies very regularly. There's a couple that I don't use very regularly at all, but I have at least used them. So there's some supplies that I just barely got, which I'm super excited to share with you guys soon. And those are not included because I haven't used them at all. You will see that some of my answers I haven't used this supply in this book, but they might be based on what I've heard from other people. But I didn't want to include supplies that I haven't used at all yet because that just didn't make sense. So maybe in the future I will do an updated video of this with those other supplies. But for right now, I am going off of what I have used the most. And I also built off of my answers from my last 2 videos. So I tried to include books that I didn't already include because if I was thinking about this from a wider stance, I would look at, well, if I already chose Mythomorphia, which I actually did choose twice, if I already chose Mythomorphia twice, I'm working my answers off of, I already have that book in my collection. So I'd want to diversify things. Hopefully that makes sense. But anyways, let's get into it and I will share my answers with you. So first up, supply wise, we have Tombow dual brush pens. Sorry, this is a big case, but and a little bit of a glare from my light. But you can see I don't have all of them. I have a decent amount of them though. Now I don't use these as often as I should. They were a gift, so I'm very, very grateful to have them in my collection, but I should use them more. And I chose Circle of Life. So if I only had one book that I could use Tombow dual brush pens in, I'm choosing Circle of Life. Now, I have not used them in this book, but I have heard a lot of people say they are great for basing in this book. They don't bleed through the paper. And I definitely want to use them when I color in this book next. But those ones are definitely highly based off of other people's opinions, and it's mostly just because I would definitely still want to have this book in my collection. And I have heard over and over and over again that Tombow dual brush pens are really, really great in this book, and a lot of people use them. So that is what I'm basing my answer off for this one. If I could only have one book to use Tombow dual brush pens in, I would choose Circle of Life by Malcolm and Chatspanic. Okay, the next supply is jelly roll pens. Now, again, this was a gift, so I have a very large set of jelly roll pens. Again, sorry for the glare of the light. But as you can see, I have these, this is multiple sets in one. Now, these are hard because I don't really just color with these by themselves. So I usually use them to cover up lines or to add little details. But if I could only have one book to use them in, It would definitely have to be a Johanna Basford book. I think that a lot of her illustrations just have those really small details that work well for gel pens. And so I chose Small Victories. Sorry for my dog shaking in the background. So again, if you're keeping track based on the other videos, I did choose World of Flowers last video for a category. So that means I've chosen 2 Johanna Basford books now. But yeah, like I said, I just think that she has so many small details that if I was only going to use gel pens in a book, it makes the most sense for it to be this book. And this is my uncolored version. I do have 2 copies of this book, and I actually do have a page in the other one. So I should have grabbed that one to show you, but I do have a page in that one where I have only used gel pen. So yeah, I'm really happy with this choice. It definitely makes the most sense. There's just so many small details that if I only had one book that I could use gel pens in, I would choose Small Victories by Johanna Basford. The next supply is one that I use all the time. It's one of my favorite. It's my Prismacolor pencils. I use these usually daily, or at least every time I'm sitting down to color. It most of the time, it's very rare that I don't use Prismacolor pencils on a page, but that may change. Again, I'm just teasing a little bit that I did get a new supply recently that you won't see in this video, but you will see soon, I'm sure, that may change that. So we will see. But yeah, I love Prismacolor pencils. I've definitely heard some mixed feelings about them in the community. They're the first pencil that I ever got, and I still love them. I use them all the time. It was hard picking a book for this because my immediate thought, I really like using Prismacolors on smooth paper. That's probably, I mean, even though I use them on everything, I definitely prefer them the most on smooth paper. And immediately my thought went to Christine Caron. And as you know, Wondrous Folk is a project book on the channel, and I only use Prismacolors in that book. But I chose Wondrous Folk back when I did my one book per illustrator video. And while it would be great to have 2 Christine Caron books, I think I just had to save another book, which was Symphony of Cute Animals. So this one I did not choose last time because I chose Leon's Journey instead. So if I could only have one book that I would use Prismacolors in, I would use this book. The paper is pretty smooth in this book too, and so they work nicely. I used them on this page. I based with Albert Durers, but I went over the top with Prismacolors, and they worked beautifully. Had a great experience using them on that page. This one, I think a couple places I may have used them. This one, not very good blending them there, but yeah. So I had to save Symphony of Cute Animals. I really would want this in my collection too. So when I thought of other books that have smooth paper besides Christine Caron, I thought of Symphony of Cute Animals. So if I only had one book that I could use Prismacolors in, while it was a very, very hard choice, I would choose Symphony of Cute Animals by Kanoko Igusa. Okay, the next supply is Albert Durers. So these are probably my second most used pencil. And I'm still learning to use these quite a bit, but I'm still going through a bit of a learning curve. But one book I used them in recently that I really, really enjoyed the experience was Flights of Fancy. And I used them on this bee page. I used them for the bees. And like I said, still a bit of a learning curve, but I didn't go over the top of them or anything with the bees. I just used the Albert Durers, and I like the way that this page turned out with that. So if I could only have, they worked really, really nicely on this paper. The red is actually, that came through to this side is actually the pastel, but otherwise they worked really nicely. I used them here as well to base this page. And yeah, they just work really nicely on this paper, and I've loved using them in this book. So if I could only have one book where I use Albert Dur's, it would be Flight to Fancy by Camelia de Rico. Okay. The next is a supply that I hardly ever use. So this one was definitely hard. And I just have this tiny set of Derwent ink tints. So I only have 12 of them, which probably contributes to why I don't use them very often. But I do have them. And this one was hard, like I said, probably because I don't use them very often. But I have heard that they work really nice in airy books, airy, however you say it. And when I started thinking about it, I don't know why I didn't include her in my books per illustrator, because I do have at least 3 of her books. So then looking through my answers from the previous ones, I did choose her, however, in my last video. I chose The Magical Land of Lara Mia, which immediately when I was thinking, okay, well, I've heard Inktense work well in Erie, I would choose that book. But then I realized I'd already chosen that one. So I did decide to still go with an airy book, but I picked this one. I have this as it translates to A Journey to the Land of Fairies and Magic, but I think I've heard some people call it something else. So who knows? But this is the one that I chose if I could only have one book to use Inktense in. Ideally, I would hope that someday I would own more than a 12 set if I could only use them in this book. But alas, I do still think that this is a good choice. And again, I'm trusting the community on this one because I have not. This is actually an uncolored book, but I have not used Inktense in this book. So bit of a gamble there, but if I could only have one book to use Inktense in, I would choose A Journey to the Land of Fairies and Magic by Ari. The next one was another hard one. It was my alcohol markers. So I have the 96 pastel set. Probably seen them on my channel before. I use these a lot for basing. I would say these are probably my second most used supply in general next to the Prismacolors. And this one was hard too just because I would definitely want to choose a single-sided book. I originally thought of Lulu's House of Wonder, but I chose that back in my books per illustrator for Lulu Mayo. So then I thought, well, what book do I use them in the most? And it's definitely this book, Capybara Cuties. And I definitely would want to keep this book in my collection. So I use alcohol markers to base everything. As you can see, this is a page for this month that's based. You probably saw some of my catch-up pages are based as well. And I usually, here's a finished one, so I usually just use the alcohol markers and leave the alcohol marker for the capybaras, and then I base everything else but go over it with usually Prismacolor. So I definitely would want to have this book in my collection, and I do use my alcohol markers in here every single month. So if I could only have one book in my collection where I use alcohol markers, I would choose Capybara Cuties by Rob Parkinson. Now, because I chose Capybara Cuties for that one, I then went to my Staedtler pigment pens. Now, I've only used these once, and they've worked great. I'm hoping to use them again this month. And I used them in I want to say a Maria Trolle book, however you say her last name. And they worked really great. They didn't bleed through or anything. And I've heard that they don't really bleed through. They're really fun to experiment with. But since I didn't choose a Morgan O'Brien book for alcohol markers, I chose a Morgan O'Brien book for the Staedtler pigment pens. And I chose Magic Mouse, a pumpkin party coloring book. And the paper on this one is actually really smooth. So this is another book that Prismacolors work well in, but I really, because the areas are so large, I really like to base them with something before doing pencil. So I chose this one for the Staedtler pigment pens. Now this is another one that I haven't used the pigment pens in, but now I'm curious because I'm curious to know how they would work in here. But yes, mostly I chose this one because I normally use alcohol markers, but since if I only had one book I chose Capybara Cuties to use alcohol markers in, I thought that the pigment pens would work nicely for this one because I would still definitely want to have a Morgan O'Brien book as well. So that is everything for this video. That is my medium matchup video. Again, these aren't all of the supplies that I have, but they're the ones that I use the most frequently and the ones that made the most sense to feature for this video. In the future, maybe I will do something else. A lot of the supplies that I didn't include that I still use somewhat regularly are things that I only use for backgrounds. So that didn't feel super relevant. But in the future, I might update this video and see how my answers have changed. If you want to do if you could only have one medium matchup, I will put my mediums and my choices down in the description just to kind of give you ideas. But the cool thing about if other people want to do this video is everybody's going to have different mediums. So we might have some the same, we might have some different, but I think it would be really cool to see people's answers for this one because I think they're going to vary a lot. It could be a completely different video. So if you want to do a medium matchup video, if you could only have one, please make sure to tag me because I am so excited to see what everybody else's answers are. And I will catch you guys next time.